Have you ever been to prison or jail? If so, we don't have to paint a picture for you. Those memories are ingrained in your mind, though it's likely you wish you could forget. But if you haven't ever been incarcerated, allow us to explore this topic together. Imagine yourself in a small room big enough to hold a small metal toilet, maybe a sink, cold concrete walls, and a bunk bed or two. Sleeping with complete strangers with no trust or time to befriend. Trapped by antiquated rules of territory and chaos with no space for privacy. The lights don't go out at night, the beds are hard, and the mattresses are thin. Noises echo through a concrete chamber as if they are happening right at your pillow. The steel door and a tiny glass window is your only view out until a new day starts. You rise and prepare with hundreds of other people in open showers and open bathroom stalls, carrying everything you need in your hands. Dressed in poorly fitted uniforms where your name is replaced with a number and your shoes replaced with a thin loafer that gives you no support or warmth. Any work and free time is burdened by the lack of support on your feet and the low pay, if any pay at all, you get in return. You might make enough in the day to buy an overpriced pack of ramen from the commissary that gives you just a quick glimpse of what your life was like before, or have enough money saved to make a short phone call home. No nutrition for your body, no stimulation for your mind, no touch for your heart. When your friends and family can make the trip to see you, your mom can't hold you or comfort you, your brother or sister can't hold your hand to tell you it will be okay, and your friends can't stroke your back to comfort your soul. And now, imagine adding everything you know about pregnancy to this equation. Labor, delivery, and the postpartum season, morning sickness, extreme fatigue, food aversions and cravings, heartburn, the discomfort in your torso as your bones shift to accommodate a growing human, 6 weeks post-delivery recovery, postpartum depression, and on and on. Can you fathom this? Can you imagine pregnancy or motherhood from behind bars? So many of the things that a woman might have very strong feelings about are now no longer up to her. Birth plans, choosing a physician, packing a hospital bag, bonding with a newborn, doctor's appointments, nursing on a schedule, nursing at all. It's all been taken away. Motherhood Beyond Bars ensures a healthy start for infants born to incarcerated women by providing a network of comprehensive support for mothers and caregivers. They believe pregnancy and birth should be a time of transformation, not trauma. They believe every woman should have access to quality care and compassionate childbirth support. They believe every child born to an incarcerated woman deserves to be bonded from birth and supported by a community of care. And they believe women moving beyond prison deserve to be prepared to parent with confidence. We had the privilege of sitting down with Amy Ard, founder and executive director of Motherhood Beyond Bars. Pull up a chair and join our conversation as we talk through the overall topic of incarceration as a whole, and then buckle up as Amy takes us on a focused journey into the world of handcuffs, iron bars, and babies. You ready? Here we go. Hey, Lynn.
Hey, Dee.
Season 2.
We're finally here.
Finally.
It's going to be a wild season.
It's going to be great.
Yeah,
We're going to jump right into talking about incarceration. And why does that even matter to us? Why should we care?
Right, especially if it hasn't impacted you directly.
Yeah.
It's a great question to ask. I think it's something we need to ask every single episode, every new topic. Why even care about this thing that probably hasn't directly impacted us or possibly hasn't directly impacted us? Yeah. So I think one place to start is with a pretty staggering statistic. 1 in 3 people in the United States has a criminal record.
1 in 3.
1 in 3 people.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot.
So for sure, I know someone who has been incarcerated.
Yes, if it's not you, it's someone you know. Yeah. And for me, I've had people who we know were innocent that were incarcerated. We have people who we know were guilty that were incarcerated. And we have people who have been severely traumatized by the system of incarceration. But I do want to say, as a little caveat here, I know it's a privilege of mine that that's not part of my direct story, that I got to grow up in a world where it didn't directly impact me or the people in my household. I know there are a lot of people out there who have experienced a lot of incarceration in their childhood, upbringing, lifetimes, and it's a privilege of mine that I didn't have to endure that kind of suffering.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah.
When you say privilege, though, can you maybe clarify what you mean there?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a bigger conversation about this on our Patreon. So check that out later. But for now, we can start with this little thought experiment. This is not a definition, but a thought experiment, because I know a lot of people take the phrase privilege and roll their eyeballs as far back into their heads as they possibly can. But I don't think it means what most people think it means.
Okay.
Privilege isn't the presence of perks and benefits. It's the absence of obstacles and barriers. If you have a hard time recognizing your privileges, focus on what you don't have to go through that maybe other people do. And let that fuel your empathy and action.
Man.
So really thinking through what it might be like to be the spouse of an incarcerated person, the parent of an incarcerated person, the child of an incarcerated person, or even an incarcerated person. What does that process look like? What's it look like to have to go to jail or prison?
Yeah. And we hope to develop that, you call it a muscle, an empathy muscle, all along the way. So I know that we'll dive into that later too, about how we can be more empathetic.
Right.
When I think about growing up, I definitely know that I was privileged in that, I didn't have relatives or anything that I knew of that were incarcerated. And my general view, I think, of people who were in prison or jail was that they were bad. And that's how I saw people that were in prison.
Yeah. Thinking of them as bad. And unfortunately, what you're really doing in that moment is you're making someone become the culmination of the thing they did. Like you're only as good as the worst thing you've done, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So just by calling them bad, you're stripping away their humanity and their story.
Right. So I recently listened to this podcast called You're Wrong About, and there's an episode where they talk about justice and the prison system.
Which we will link in our show notes.
For sure. And they discuss this current prison system model that is retributive, meaning you caused suffering, so you're going to experience suffering.
Somebody does something that breaks a law or whatever, and so what we are saying is they get a consequence. But what do we really want? Do we just want them to feel the same amount of pain and or suffering that they may have caused somebody else? Do we want that at all? And then what? So now you've endured pain, suffering, and probably a lot of trauma, and then we just throw you back out into the world and say, now do it again.
Yeah.
Do it better this time. Does that work? Is that going to work for anybody?
Yeah. Which is what they discuss quite a bit, is a restorative idea. Yeah. Which really includes more than just
like doing this instead of the retributive, doing a more restorative
model.
Yeah.
Where it's a more holistic approach where you are involving the offender and the victim and the community and the system and the cycle. Like the
stories and where they came from and their history and their experiences and who they are as a human being.
Yeah.
Into the process of restoring them.
Yeah. And realizing that they're broken. They're not bad. Like, you're not bad. You're broken.
Yeah.
I'm not bad. I'm broken.
Yeah.
And that people deserve second chances. And so I would, definitely encourage you to listen to that episode.
I love that you said people deserve second chances, because I just saw a little thing, like a little meme, that said, don't you believe in second chances, especially if they weren't ready for the first one? I'm like, yep, that's it.
I wasn't ready for the first one.
Right.
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 None of us were.
Right. I've also done a little bit of digging in my own personal life. In response to the events of 2020, I was watching a lot of documentaries on the Black community in America and what they've had to endure in their history and all of that. And one of the ones that I watched was called 13th. It's a documentary on Netflix. I recently just rewatched it for the third time. I think it is one of my all-time favorites. It's lengthy, but it is so good. And it is about the history of Black America and what they've had to endure. But within that and wrapped up in that is the history of the system of incarceration in America. And it doesn't matter who you know, what ethnicity they are, where they come from, what their story is, what neighborhood they grew up in. If they have been impacted by the system of incarceration, they have been impacted by this very, very, very broken system that is hurting a lot of people and causing a lot of problems. And one of the things that I took away that really lends itself to this discussion that we're having right now is that pockets are being filled by bodies being in those prisons and jails. Is that how it's supposed to be?
Yeah.
Does that feel like that's correct?
Yeah.
I don't feel like it does feel that way. We're continuing to really wrestle with some of these things. Mm-hmm. We are not experts on this topic.
Right.
We do not know answers or majority of answers. We are coming at this as complete, I don't want to say idiots. What are we coming at it as?
Learners.
Students.
Open-minded.
Absolute students. Yeah. And we're not trying to become experts on this topic. But we are saying if 1 in 3 of my neighbors has a criminal record and has been, touched by this issue, then I would say it's my duty as a neighbor to give this some space and give it some attention so that I can then love them well.
Yeah. Which is exactly what Amy Ard is doing with Motherhood Beyond Bars, right?
That's it. Yes.
So what are we going to be hearing about today?
So today we are hearing about Motherhood Beyond Bars, an organization based here in North Georgia. And they are incredible. You've already heard a little recap of them at the intro. But we do want to say that Amy uses the word doula a lot in her interview. And we didn't take the time to define that. So we want to define what doula means before we jump in. Go ahead. You got it? You got the definition?
The internet definition
is
a trained professional who provides guidance and support
Yeah.
for women who are pregnant.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Pre-delivery, during delivery, and post-delivery. Yeah. And we took childbirthing classes from a doula organization, and they are freaking incredible. They really know the process. They know the body. They really go up to bat for you. And it's pretty awesome. And that's Amy's background. So we're going to hear a little bit more about that from her.
So how did you find Amy anyway?
Remember last season, I talked with Ari,
yes,
who is a child welfare attorney in Hall County. I took some exercise classes with her.
Okay.
She used to kick my ass weekly. She's beast mode on all the fronts.
Get it, Ari?
Yes, Ari. Well, she and Amy are friends and do work together because Ari's on the child welfare end and Amy is on the child welfare and justice end.
Right.
Well,
so
they both are. Yeah,
naturally coincides.
Yes. And also I think Ari's mom, who has done years of work in the prison systems in Louisiana, also worked with Amy Ard a little bit. So just being friends with Ari, I followed her. She would share things about Motherhood Beyond Bars. I didn't always see the things that she shared, but I do remember a Kickstarter. They were fundraising to write their own children's book. And it is so good.
Yeah.
We will attach a link to that in our show notes as well. And then as soon as we started this podcast, I was like, yep.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Motherhood Beyond Bars.
Yeah.
Are we ready?
I think we're ready.
Let's hear from Amy Ard and Motherhood Beyond Bars.
I am Amy, and I grew up in Atlanta and traveled a bit around. I graduated from Grady High School in Atlanta, Georgia, and then went to Ohio for college. And then traveled the world, then went to graduate school, and all the way along have been trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I'll be 50 this year. And so I actually, that wanderlust has never really left. I am always thinking about the way to use the talents that I have and the gifts that I've been given in the best possible way. And I thought I had figured that out. I was a childbirth doula for 10 years.
Wow.
And so I loved watching babies be born. I loved watching women do hard things with a lot of support. And I thought that I would just do childbirth for the rest of my life. And my story for how I ended up doing this work is tied directly to being a doula. I was supporting a family in Washington, D.C. in a hospital, busy inner city hospital, and my client needed some ice chips, which is pretty common for a doula. So I picked up the cup and walked out into the hallway, and there was a gurney, so a stretcher that had been brought in from an ambulance in the hallway. No one was on it, but hanging off the side was a pair of handcuffs. And it was the first time I had ever seen an image like that in labor and delivery. Labor and delivery is usually a place where people are feeling empowered and lots of positive vibes. And that just did not jive. And I stood staring at that image. And then the room next to the one I was working in, the door opened up and an armed guard walked out. And I realized in that moment that the handcuffs that were on the woman on the stretcher were probably on the woman in the room next to mine, and that there was likely someone chained to a bed trying to deliver a baby with an armed guard by her side. And my world turned a little sideways, and I finished up that birth that day, but went home and started trying to learn everything I could about pregnancy and incarceration. I had been doing this for 10 years, and it was the first time that it had occurred to me that someone could be in prison or jail and also need to deliver a baby and what that might look like. And in the course of reading about pregnancy and incarceration, I stumbled on a lot of statistics about what states it was legal to shackle women who were giving birth. And my home state of Georgia was on that list. And I think, as we'll discover in our conversation today, there's lots of moments of magic, but that one experience of seeing an image that really just rocked my world and unsettled me so much that I went down a deep rabbit hole, and that rabbit hole, it pops up in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah. Well, and you called it magic, and that's what we say, same thing, that it's having the ability to be curious in a moment of shock and to let it unsettle you a little bit and to follow that. Mm-hmm. So the fact that that's how your story starts, it's absolutely perfect.
It's
I love
magic.
It. It's magic. Okay, so what is your occupational title?
I'm executive director
of
Motherhood Beyond Bars, which is a nonprofit.
Yes. Okay.
That is also kind of an interesting story.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So when I moved, it's sequential in a little bit. I moved here, had no idea what I was going to do, and started just trying to find people that had the experience of being incarcerated or were working with women who were pregnant and incarcerated. And we started working on legislation, and I can tell you how that process unfolded. But one of the phone calls I made was to a woman named Bethany Kotler, who was teaching a childbirth class inside prison in Georgia where all pregnant women are held. And I reached out to Bethany and said, I am here. I'm working on this legislation. I want to try to start a doula program because that's what I was going to do. I was going to come here and be a doula for women who were in prison. And she said, well, good luck with that. I've been trying to figure that one out for a while. Let's go to lunch. And so we went to lunch, and during that lunch, she said, Motherhood Beyond Bars was the name of the childbirth class, and it's kind of turned into all of these other things. There's no organization. It's just me and a couple of volunteers. And by the way, I'm moving to Massachusetts in like a few weeks.
Oh.
And I took a beat and I said, well, if you give me your baby, I'll take good care of it, which is funny because that's what we've ended up trying to do, is take good care of a lot of babies. And I said, if I can use the name Motherhood Beyond Bars, a name that the Department of Corrections already recognizes as an organization, I will try to make a go of this, but I'm going to turn it into a nonprofit. I'm going to move forward with the doula program, but I will make sure that the programs that you've built and the relationships you've established, we can move forward with those. And she said, fantastic. And that's the day that I became the executive director of a yet to be formed, but soon to be formed nonprofit. That was the only, for a long time, that was my title was the only thing I had. There was no money. There was no bank account.
Yeah.
There was no money. There was no salary. I was driving to Lee Arendale State Prison and trying to find a gas stipend to do that.
Yeah.
But Bethany going out to lunch, and again, that timing was kind of magic. It was just like a month or so before she was gone. And
incredible.
If those paths hadn't have crossed, I'm not sure what Motherhood Beyond Bars would have been.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay, so here we are. Brief overview of, and we'll go deeper, but Motherhood Beyond Bars. What do you do?
There's been a major shift in our work. So I usually say from 2013 to 2019, all of our programs happen inside prisons, basically two.
Okay.
There's one prison in Georgia where all pregnant women are held, and that's called Helms. And then there is another prison where all the women, after they give birth, they go to Lee Arendale State Prison. We're on the verge of that changing, but that is our work from 2013 to 2019 was in those prisons. And we did childbirth education, postpartum support groups, prenatal yoga, and baby showers. Super fun, baby showers. And the women that we worked with always said they wanted us to do two things additionally. They wanted someone to help take care of their babies, and they wanted help reuniting with their children and their families when they got out. And there were two rules for in-person volunteers at the prison that made that very difficult for us to do. One, we were not allowed to have any contact with family members of the women that we worked with inside prison. And we were not supposed to have a program with women inside prison. And we weren't supposed to funnel them into a reentry program when they got out. And the prison had a set of values and an understanding of the risks that made those rules, that were the reason for those rules, even though we disagreed with them.
Right.
So the two things that the women were asking us to do, we couldn't do. We couldn't contact family members. We couldn't check in on their babies. And we weren't supposed to work with them once they got out. And at the end of 2019, the writing on the wall was pretty clear that the relationship between Motherhood Beyond Bars and the Georgia Department of Corrections was going downhill pretty fast. And we were always walking on eggshells when we went into the prison to try to, serve the women that we were working with fidelity and compassion, and also make sure that the Department of Corrections liked us. And that was just getting to be a very difficult tightrope to walk. And at some point, there were rumors that Georgia Department of Corrections was calling colleagues of mine and telling them to cease having contact with me. I was hearing that some staff at the prison was told they couldn't talk to me or they'd lose their job. They have never communicated directly with me. I've never gotten a letter that says, Amy Art is a bad person and can't come into the prisons. But in November,
of 2019
said, they don't pay us anything to come in and deliver these programs. They're not super supportive. The only thing they do is open the door and let us come in. And they could stop doing that, and we wouldn't have any programs. And so I was in a minivan in a CVS parking lot when I had kind of another midlife crisis, realizing that all of the programs that we had built up were just hanging by a thread, and that thread seemed to be fraying pretty quickly. And so I stopped for a beat, and I remembered that the women had already told us what they wanted us to do. And we had always said, those are such good ideas, and we just can't do those. And in retrospect, I know that if we had offered the women a choice, we can help take care of your babies and still communicate with you and then work with you when you get out, or B, we can come in and do this class for 2 hours every week. I think their answer, and I know their answer now, would be very clear. Please help take care of our babies, because they're mothers. And they were absolutely, they were stuck in a place that they could not reach out. They couldn't raise money. They couldn't send diapers home. They couldn't do any of the things that they felt compelled to do as mothers. And so we made the decision with a little push from the Department of Corrections to not walk into the prison facilities anymore, to not do the in-person classes, but to do exactly the two things that women had asked us to do. And so our program shifted dramatically in 2020. What we didn't know was that, by March of 2020, our programs would have shut down anyway.
Okay, so can we go back a little bit? Like what is the need for motherhood beyond bars anyway? Why is there a need for advocacy for women incarcerated who are pregnant or have babies outside of?
Yeah. We are responding to the crisis, and I do characterize it as a crisis of maternal incarceration in this country. There has been a 700% increase in the number of women who are locked up in our country. This has a lot to do with women's pathways into the criminal legal system, the drug epidemic, and especially in rural communities. But we know that when a mother is arrested and goes away, either into jail for a short period of time or prison once she's sentenced, the ripple effects on families and communities really are pretty dramatic. When a woman is arrested, her children are 5 times more likely to end up in the foster care system than when a man is arrested, when the father goes away. And that's because generally when a man is arrested who's a father, there's the mother of the child, there's a community of women generally that step in and surround those children, try to provide some stability and security. When a mother is arrested and goes away, she's really lucky if there is one person on the outside that is willing to step in and help care for her family in her absence. And once the child welfare system gets involved in a family like this, it's a long goodbye once you've been introduced. So if the child welfare system steps in a mother's absence, the risk of her losing her parental rights goes it's pretty dangerous for her because there's federal legislation that 15 out of 22 months, if your kids are in foster care, your parental rights can be severed automatically. So what we're seeing is that we've got an increase of moms ending up in prison or jail. Their children are at great risk. Someone, usually a grandmother, is trying to hold that family together, but that person doesn't get any of the support that a foster family would get. There's no financial help. They often have a hard time navigating any systems that they are eligible for. They may not even know about it. So these families are at real risk of being torn apart permanently. And when we started looking around for organizations that were reaching out to them, we found nobody. And there was, the Department of Family and Children's Services was not involved. There was no one from the prison that was reaching out. There was no one from the hospital where all the babies were born, the social worker. Once the baby walked out of the hospital with whoever came to pick the baby up, that was it. They disappeared from view. And no one could tell us even where these children were living. We realized because we were sitting with women in prison, all of the women in the postpartum support group, at one point I realized that I thought I was the only person in the state of Georgia that knew where these babies were. And that was just because I was talking to the mothers as a group every week. And that was scary. And so we are responding to that particular situation, which we do characterize as the crisis, because every single one of these children is at risk from the moment they take their first breath. They have one adverse childhood experience checked off on their checklist. They've been born to a person that's in prison. And we know that these other experiences, when you live in these families that are so cut off from other avenues of support, they're likely to end up with some other ACEs on their checklist too. And that's one of the reasons we know kids born to women in prison or anyone in prison are more likely to have trouble learning at school. They're more likely to have a mental health diagnosis. And the women in our postpartum group, if you were to ask them how many of them grew up with a parent in prison, the vast majority, like 13 out of 14, the one time I asked that question, they grew up with a parent in prison.
Wow.
We are trying to break that cycle. What women what women experience during pregnancy and childbirth is horrific, and you wouldn't wish it on anyone. We make it very hard to hear their stories. The Department of Corrections is not anxious for people to find out what pregnancy and childbirth looks like. But if you even say, like, those women did something kind of bad, they may deserve what they have coming to them, and something that I do not agree with, we can make a strong case that we have to try something else for these kids.
In 2019, you said you shifted gears from being in the prison. So you guys do not go in the prisons anymore.
Mm-mm.
I did not know that. And then now, what does it look like? What do you guys do on a daily basis?
That is an impossible question. We have a couple of people we consider our primary clients. Those are mothers. The mothers inside are the first people that we're reaching out to. We explain our program to them either by
any mothers,
mail,
not just pregnant
women
mothers.
In particular.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of moms find us with young children, but we draw a circle. Our primary work, because capacity is limited and our staff is small, we are really going to focus on people who have had the experience of pregnancy while incarcerated and in prisons or in jails. But it's easier for us to find the women in prison because they're all held at one facility, and we can write proactively to them. We send in a survey to them once that we've had a way to introduce our program. And we ask them who's coming to pick their baby up at the hospital. And most people are surprised to find that the division, like foster care, is not involved in these families from the beginning, almost never. Unless the family has prior involvement, they have other children that have been in foster care, or they are on the radar of the child welfare system, there's no interaction there. So if you were going away for a year and needed someone to watch your kids, you wouldn't assume that foster care would be stepping in and knocking on your front door. It's the same here. So we ask them who's coming to pick up their baby, and we tell them all the ways we plan to support them and the caregiver. And we then begin kind of this triangle relationship between the mom who's incarcerated, her chosen caregiver, and us as facilitators of the relationship, or just getting information, making sure that everyone knows that we're here to support them. And that happens throughout the woman's pregnancy. We'll send in childbirth education materials. There used to be a class inside. I don't believe it's happening anymore. And then we have the birth of the baby. And we work directly with the hospital where all the babies are born, and make sure that every caregiver leaves the hospital with the supplies that you need to safely care for a newborn. So we call it our Begin box, and it is beautiful. It is all brand new stuff. It is baby books. It is pacifiers and adorable clothing and a safe place for the baby to sleep. And we really use this box as a way of introducing the idea that this child is a beloved member of our community. And so we want it to be sparkly and new, and the caregivers are blown away by this stuff. And then we make an important promise to the caregiver and the mother that they will not have to buy a pack of diapers for this child.
Wow.
The women that we worked with inside, again, were the impetus for this portion of our program, which has really turned out to be very critical, because when a diaper is a whole lot more than something that covers a baby's butt, we heard over and over again that women would call home to check on their baby. That's if they had the money to make that phone call. And they would hear a baby crying in the background. And the caregiver would say something like, "Oh, it's just bad diaper rash." And over again, moms were hearing this. And it wasn't just one mother. It was so many mothers in our postpartum group. And then the mothers would start to say things like, "I don't think she's taken very good care of my baby. Every time I call, the baby is crying and diaper rash." And it occurred to us that that was probably true, that the caregivers probably didn't have enough money to change those babies' diapers as often as they needed to be changed. And that's not surprising, because 1 in 3 families in this country experiences diaper poverty. They don't have enough money to change diapers as frequently. And in the richest nation on earth, we have had children die of infection that was due to diaper rash.
Wow.
And so we figured as we started to think about what's the one thing we might do to really support these families from the gate, again, the women gave us the answer: send diapers. And that is a powerful promise to the women and to the caregivers, that you'll never have to buy a pack. We'll send them. You can change them as often as you want. These diapers will be arriving on your doorstep. And that's, for many of them, unlike any agency or organization that they've ever heard of before. And the powerful thing that it does for us is that it encourages people to pick up the phone when we call. So they may be suspicious of organizations and agencies, but if they know that they need to talk to someone before the diapers arrive, because there is no sense in us sending size 2 diapers this month when, it was size 1 last month or size 3, babies grow.
Yeah.
So in order for us to send the diapers, we need to have a conversation with you about the size of the baby's diaper. And those conversations then generally turn into a lot longer conversations. And over time, we are building authentic, trusting relationships with caregivers and the moms. And the diapers are our gateway to doing that. And we also have gotten into, we consider ourselves kind of the one-stop shop for these families in applying for the social services that they are eligible for. So many of them were leaving the hospital and didn't realize that they could qualify for food stamps or women, infants, and children WIC, and we became gateway community providers. So now they can call us over the phone. We can sit at our computers and apply for those things on their behalf, and then reapply when it's time to reapply. We're really just like a social work agency with people who are really good at building relationships. And I think that's the key. Like there are agencies and organizations out there, they've got some office hours and maybe hard to get in touch with them, but you don't feel like you're friends, and they're designed that way. There's healthy boundaries, and then there are boundaries that are just obnoxious. And I think we've hit the nail on the head with figuring out how to build really authentic relationships with people that serve a really greater good.
Yeah. How many families do you guys think you serve right now?
Families in our caregiver program, I think that it's about 81. Not all of those are receiving diapers. We really like it when babies get potty trained. Saves us a lot of cash.
Yeah.
I think one of our case managers the other day was like, "Is it okay this month?" They asked if we could send a potty seat instead of diapers. I was like, "Oh, 100% yes." We can send them a potty seat every month because those are cheaper than diapers. So yeah, about 80 families. We expect about 50 babies born out of the prison system.
You may not know this. How many pregnant women are in jails in Georgia?
We have no idea.
Really?
So we can't tell you how many pregnant women are in jails because no one is counting them. And there's a woman who's written a book called Jail Care, which is it's very comprehensive book on pregnancy and incarceration. But she says, we count people that count. And Georgia clearly doesn't think much of pregnant women in jails. We can't even tell you how many there are.
Oh my gosh.
And that means we can't find them.
Yeah, how do you contact them?
They have to find us, or their family members have to find us. I got a call from a jail yesterday from someone who wasn't pregnant herself, but already knew about us and wanted to understand more about the program so she could tell the pregnant women who were in jail with her about the program. So she'll call back with names and we'll be able to reach out.
Do you guys work hand in hand with other organizations that work with the incarcerated population?
We are part of a collaboration of about 60 organizations called the Justice Reform Partnership. That's organizations that do everything from legal advocacy, reentry programs. There's a lot of policy work that happens in that collaboration. We are increasingly, I think, we find ourselves at the intersection of the child welfare system and the criminal legal system. And I think we, especially when it comes to infants and newborns, we are the only people in that intersection. And so we're starting to really talk about the work that we do in terms of foster care prevention, because that is a real emphasis of the child welfare system, is to try to keep these families, to give them the support they need so that we don't end up having kids in foster care. Because what's happening to the families that we work with, and we can make a fiscal argument about this, like the state is paying to incarcerate the woman and then paying to put her child in foster care. there are programs that provide rehabilitative services like Mary Hall Freedom Village and Hope House in Augusta and Right Side Up treatment, where the state's not paying for the mom or the baby, and they're getting the services that they actually need to then come back and be vital and productive and members of our community.
Yeah.
Why would we not do that?
Right.
Vanessa Garrett, who is our program director, gave testimony at a congressional subcommittee hearing in the Georgia legislature about the conditions of confinement in the Georgia prison system. During that hearing, a guard from Lee Arundel called in to give testimony and said that on a good day, 7 guards showed up for work at Lee Arundel State Prison. That's a facility that can hold or has held up to 1,700 women. During the pandemic was a lot less. But when you have 7 people showing up for work in a prison setting, it doesn't matter whether there are 100 women there or 1,200 women there. It's not safe for the women who are held there or for the people that work there. And the prison system right now is so understaffed. That's, I think, what is leading to a lot of the violence that we see inside the prisons. They don't have the bandwidth to also deal with volunteers.
Yeah.
So they can't guarantee the safety of the volunteers because they can't guarantee the safety of anyone in those facilities.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to open themselves up to that, which means that people are spending more time in solitary confinement. People, or we see the gang problem, that the gangs take over the prisons. It's a chicken and an egg problem, I imagine, for them as they're sitting around trying to figure out how to solve it. I'm glad that that's not my problem to solve. And at the end of the day, I will tell you, the taxpayers of Georgia who complain about tax, we are the people to blame, because we have decided that we are not willing to pay more, or to pressure our legislators or our governor to spend more money to create the kinds of carceral settings that return people better than they were when they went in. Mm-hmm. Instead, we have decided they can return them to us in whatever shape, with whatever traumas, with whatever horrible experiences that they've experienced in prison. Just give them back to us then. Well, what do we think is going to happen?
Yeah.
And that's us. That's on us, because we don't pressure our government to do better at the end of the day. And they don't make it easy for us to hear the stories about what's going on in there. I think that's, a little bit where I probably got into trouble with the GDC, is at some point the public has to know what's happening, because we have to demand better. And if the Department of Corrections and other people had a longer view of the situation, they might look at organizations like mine and understand that we're really working towards the same thing.
Yeah.
We want facilities that are safe. We want the people that work there to be safe, and we want that the people who are coming out, as almost everyone in prison is, they're coming back one day. We want them to come back better than they were when they went in.
Yeah. So, that's so much and so heavy. What do you do with all of that, other than you have your pocket that you're working on? But what is the average person sitting here listening to this? What can they do?
Mm-hmm. I don't think that this is the pile of work for everybody. And we began this conversation talking about those moments of magic. And there's a lot of work to do in the world. This may not be your area. I think it is important for everyone to open their eyes to the situation. But where you dive in to fix problems, it doesn't all have to be in this place. So those moments of discomfort for you, where something stirs in your soul and you feel like this is a marriage between something that you feel compelled to do about, and it feels really broken to you, find that moment. And that's what I felt really clearly when I was staring at those handcuffs in a labor and delivery floor. Like, I knew something about childbirth, and I felt pretty clearly that I had some skills that were called for in that moment. So there's a lot of work to do, and find your place of discomfort and passion and marry those things together. For people who are interested in this work, obviously Motherhood Beyond Bars has ways to get people involved. It is tricky because we really guard our clients carefully. We're here to build relationships with them, so we often don't use volunteers to make contact with our family members. There are ways to get involved in advocacy, so following us on our Facebook, and for the people who still do that, Instagram for the people who more people do that. I'm very old, I will tell you. I post in both places, but there are opportunities and will be more opportunities for advocacy to actually change some of the policies that impact the families that we work with. And there are a lot of organizations that help support vulnerable families. And so maybe, just caring about kids and caring about poor kids and kids that LGBTQ and Black, brown kids in school. My husband runs a nonprofit called Georgia Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, and they work. We have this little continuum of people that we care about. I get the pregnant women and the babies, and he catches them at school and at home, and the foster care system. There's so many ways for people to get involved, and don't be overwhelmed by the need. At the end of the day, and I say this almost every time I talk out loud about our work, I am reminded that it is the simple acts of kindness that really seem to make the most difference to the people that we're working with. It is really nice that we changed a law, like you can't be shackled anymore. That's great. But you know what women talk about? Diapers. They talk about the fact that we gave them a really soft roll of toilet paper for Mother's Day once when they were in prison. That there is someone that picks up the phone when they call. I cannot tell you the number of times that a caregiver will call us and they cannot believe they're actually talking to a real person, that it didn't go straight to voicemail, that if it did go to voicemail, we call them back. It's relationships with real people that make a difference. And those, you don't have to be an expert in anything to build a relationship with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. How can people partner with Motherhood Beyond Bars today, tomorrow?
The first step, I think, is to follow us, to understand the work that we're doing. We tell stories about the people that we work with. We give you opportunities to advocate when we put out a call to action about calling your legislators. That's really important for people outside of Atlanta. Legislators around the state are not used to hearing from their constituents. And so I really like moving around the state and saying, pick up the phone and call your legislator, because if they get 5 calls about one issue, they assume there's like a 5-alarm fire going off. That is how infrequently they hear from their constituents. Wow. So follow us, learn about those pieces of legislation, and make phone calls. We sometimes also just put out a call for items that we need, like a fancy double stroller. Getting those to our families who live all over the place is a little more complicated. Now that we're on the other side of the pandemic, we do plan to do a whole lot more home visiting and moving around the state and being with people in their homes. So sometimes we'll need some extra support in a smaller town outside of Atlanta. And once we start to have communities that are ready to kind of wrap their arms around these families, we'll be building that network. But we know that takes time. And part of the process is just getting to know one another. So get to know us.
If you could say one thing to our neighborhoods, it could be a misconception, a lie, shocking info, but one thing that you want everyone to know about the humans that you serve, what would you say?
They are good people. The women that we work with in prison are some of the most creative and thoughtful and entrepreneurial and good people who, a lot of them have experienced lives and traumas that I still have a hard time wrapping my head around. Like, how did you survive the childhood that you had? And most of them survive it by doing the kinds of things that got them into prison, by never receiving mental health care and turning to drugs to escape. So I am really convinced that to understand how people end up in prison, you have to get to know them. You have to get to know at least a handful of them. And I'm grateful that that's kind of where my journey started, that I walked into prison, and I walked into a big prison and sat in a room with 14 women who had just had a baby, an experience that I shared, and my journey was very, very different than theirs. It was a point of connection that we had, and then I got to know them. And there's no substitute for really getting a 360 view of someone's entire life before you make a judgment about who they are right now.
That's good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love what she just said.
So good, right?
Yeah. Well, and harkens back to what we were talking about, like a restorative lens, an empathetic understanding of where they've been.
Yeah.
And you can't really understand until you have that kind of view.
Right. Do you have the quote? Can you reread it?
Yeah, sure. There's no substitute for really getting a 360-degree view of someone's entire life before you make a judgment about who they are right now.
I wish I could tattoo that on my forehead.
You can.
I can?
Sure.
That'd be like a paragraph. It would fill the whole thing. Oh, but that's so true for every single circumstance that we are often so quick to jump to a conclusion about or judge someone on.
Yeah.
If we could just take a second to say, I am seeing 2 degrees of the 360 degree degrees of view that they are. There
Right,
it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
A very
Just
small slice of the pie.
Tiny slice.
Yeah.
Of everything that they've been, everything they've experienced, everything they've endured, everything that has happened to them, around them, to make them the person that they are right now. And I have no idea. Mm-hmm. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know.
We don't know.
Lindsay, you do not know. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk through some of our biggest aha moments.
Yeah.
Other than that last mic drop of a line. Thank you, Amy Ard.
Yeah, exactly. What was one of yours?
Mine was the fact that they are a one-stop shop. They have really thought this through. It is being excellently executed, and they are providing support and stability for these caretakers who may or may not have experience raising a baby.
Right.
Who may or may not have the ability to do this.
And resources.
But what are the other options?
Right.
Like they are literally just meeting them in every area that they possibly can. And it's a case-by-case basis. We heard that from Amy, that, anything that's needed, they will go above and beyond to try and meet them for that need. So I absolutely adore that this organization is so thorough and so thoughtful and so on top of trying to be everything that they can for these families.
Well, talk about like restorative practice.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
They're doing it.
Yeah.
They are filling in as many gaps as possible.
Yeah.
To break this generational cycle.
Yes.
To make them a successful family.
Yeah.
Or unit.
Yeah. And less trauma means more success for the child as they're growing up, and a better chance at reconnecting with mom once she is able to get out.
Yeah.
I mean, it just feels like they're bringing wholeness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that was eye-opening for me was just even thinking about where the babies go. I mean, I've never, like we talked about in the beginning, I haven't had to think about it. But what happens when you have a pregnant mother who is in prison, comes out to have a baby? What happens to the baby?
Yeah.
So that was just really eye-opening. Who's the caretaker?
Right.
Are they a contact of the incarcerated woman or not?
Yeah.
It was just a huge learning opportunity for me.
But we want to talk about how you could support the work of Motherhood Beyond Bars directly. You can go directly to Motherhood Beyond Bars if you'd like to give directly to them. Their website is motherhoodbeyond.org, and you can click the donate button on their page. You can also give them a follow on Instagram at Motherhood Beyond Bars or Facebook Motherhood Beyond Bars. But you may not be here in North Georgia.
Yeah.
You might be in Texas or New York or North Carolina or California.
China.
Or China. Hey, China. And you know, this episode and this topic overall has really got your wheels turning, and you're really thinking through it. So maybe you want to find some kind of organization or people group that's serving the incarcerated population in your area. And we are huge fans of that. So we have a few tips for you. One would be to talk. If you happen to be a faith-based person, talk to your organization that you belong to. Somebody who knows about the outreach opportunities there, and ask them what you guys are doing. If they don't have anything to serve at your local jail, or maybe a pen pal program or anything like that, maybe they know of a local organization who does. And if not, maybe encourage them that you would like to get started with something like that.
Yep.
Another option is ask the people who you know who were incarcerated or are incarcerated.
Yeah.
Write them. Ask them what kind of volunteer opportunities are there in the jail, or if they remember any specific organizations who would come into the jail or prison, and what that looked like for them, and if it meant anything to them.
Yeah.
You could also Google.
I think I researched incarceration nonprofits
In my area.
Yeah. And multiple ones came up.
Yeah.
National and local.
Yes. Usually, though, they're bigger organizations, like statewide, but you might find, who knows what you might find. You might find anything. And finally, you can contact your local jail and or prison to ask how they use volunteers. Interesting, right? Just call them up and say, do you guys allow volunteers, and how do you use them? And then see what their schedule is to for offering training and security screenings for new volunteers. So lots of options there. And again, we want to encourage you, do some digging, find out what's around you and what ways you can be involved and start to bring some wholeness and restoration to this whole system. Maybe it's even for the people who are out now. Yeah. We just read a statistic that was 60% of people who have been released from prison or jail are unable to find work a year after release. And that's because of their criminal record.
Right.
And of the ones who are able to find work, they get paid 40% less annually than their peers and coworkers because of their criminal record.
Which, are you making connections with what we've talked about with homelessness? It's all
connected.
Yeah.
It's all a cycle. It's all connected. One thing leads to another. Incarceration is not its own topic, its own entity. It is connected to Black history. It is connected to homelessness. It's connected to veterans issues and mental health and PTSD and child abuse.
Drug abuse.
Everything. Yeah. It's connected to everything. Addiction. Yeah. Everything. Yeah. So that's it.
So it's been good.
It's been great. Incarceration, baby.
Yeah.
Let's circle back.
Okay. See you next time.
Whoop, whoop.
Hey, thanks for joining us on this episode of You Don't Know, a Wayfind Collective podcast. All links for today's episode can be found in our show notes. On our next episode, we'll hear from some of the mothers who have benefited from the crucial work of Motherhood Beyond Bars. We will be raising funds this entire season to support the work of Motherhood Beyond Bars, and we'd love your help. It takes $250 to fund a Begin box. It costs $75 a month to diaper one child. And since Motherhood Beyond Bars commits to providing lifetime supplies of diapers, that comes out to almost $3,000 per kiddo. You can donate to their cause and learn more about their work at motherhoodbeyond.org. Today's episode was produced and narrated by Deanna West and Lindsay Migliori. with music by Smile High featuring Antoine Stanley. Wayfind Collective is a crowd-funded nonprofit. Our mission is to learn what it truly means to love your neighbor as yourself. So we share their stories in order to evoke a culture of movement that seeks to bridge the gaps in our neighborhoods. If you want to support the show, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Wayfind. Everything we do is possible because of the generous support of many people just like you. So thank you so much for being a part of this project with us.